Okay, let's make a start. My name is Nick Chambers. Delighted to welcome you all to this webinar today. This is the first time we've attempted a virtual launch of the OECD's Education at a Glance. We've got a fantastic range of panelists taking part, lots of people joining us from all over the world. And we're going to kick straight off with someone who probably needs no introduction at all, Andreas Schleicher, Director of Education and Skills, who's going to give this year's results of Education at a Glance. Whilst he's doing so, if you have any questions, please do submit them by the chat facility. So, Andreas, over to you.
For hosting the launch of the 2020 edition of Education at a Glance, and even more so for your passion and commitment to the future of education. Thank you, Nick. Obviously, you know, education is in a difficult place. I think we have no illusions about this. The crisis has thrown many young people into uncertainty. If you just look at the school closures that we have seen, many young people were not even able to be at school during this time, and often, you know, had only patchy access to digital surrogates. And as you can see in the chat also, in some countries, school closures are still not over. Often they're localized, but, you know, many young people are still excluded from the comfortable learning environments that they knew. And this is not just, you know, impacting their future lives. You know, we expect it could dent, you know, lifetime earnings by about 3% in a country like the UK. But you can see it's going to throw long shadows over our economies in the long run. You're going to talk about, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of billion British pound or dollars, depending on where you are. When you think about, you know, that younger people have poorer skills, they're going to end up to be less productive, less able to contribute to society, even also to draw value from society. All of this is going to leave a heavy bill with us. And it's going to be hard to make up for the differences. Obviously, you know, during this crisis, learning with technology was very important. But even in a high-tech country like the UK, that was not that as common as you might think. You know, you have about 40% of British teachers who were using technology frequently for projects or classwork in Britain. And that's not so different from any other countries. Of course, you know, you have countries like Denmark or New Zealand where this is a lot more common. But generally speaking, teachers are not ready yet for the digital work in learning and teaching. How do teachers learn themselves? That's also something that we looked at, and you can see actually about half of the teachers in Britain, or in this case England, were using online courses, seminars to learn in 2018. And that's quite good by European standards. You can see most European countries actually with lower levels than this. You know, you look to Belgium, where this is, you know, less than 1 in 10 teachers. But, you know, you can see from countries like, you know, China, parts of China and Korea, it can become the norm. You know, there basically teachers learn every day through new technologies, new media, expanding their horizon. And obviously, you know, in this crisis, it was the only way to learn. There are risks to learning and employment. And I want to just look at one facet here, and that is those young people who are not in education and not in employment. It used to be a bigger issue in the UK than it is now. I think there's been progress over time, but still you have a significant share of young people who are kind of out of the picture. And they are not just the low-skilled people. That's a really interesting part. You can see the UK actually in this lower red square together with Italy and some other countries where actually we're not just talking about those who failed in school. There are also others who do not find it, you know, even if they got a degree, even if they finished school, they find it difficult to get a foothold in a kind of employment now. Education funding, you know, if you look at tertiary education, that's, you know, university or advanced vocational qualifications, you can see in the UK a lot of money comes from the private sources. Now, that's basically something that is more vulnerable now. And will people have those resources. Europe as a whole, in comparison, is more protected because most of tertiary education in European countries is funded by the public purse. In a crisis, governments can, add money to those kinds of issues. That's going to be a challenge in the UK. You're not alone. You can see countries like the United States, Japan in a very similar situation. But overall, the vulnerability of the tertiary education sector is something I think to really look out for. And I'm also saying this because actually adults still, or society still draw a lot of value out of this. For every pound that the British government invests in advanced qualifications, it gets, between 3 and 4 pounds back. That's a lot. You're on the capital market these days, you don't get anywhere this level of return. So it's not just a priority for individuals to get better skills, but certainly also for governments to ensure that education is not going to be choking off when this health crisis is turning into an economic and a financial crisis now. And I think in the UK, the most vulnerable sector is going to be the advanced degrees because they depend so much on private funding. International students are particularly affected. Closed borders, closed universities mean not just that learning is hindered, but international students also look for a lot of kind of social experiences in there. They want to know a new culture, a new kind of country. They want to get access to a labor market, and all of this is becoming difficult. Before this crisis, you can see that's been an ever increasing number of people. And if you look to the UK, it's one of the most common destinations for international students, one of the most attractive places for international students to study. And by the way, a lot of them study also at advanced levels, masters or equivalent or PhDs. It's not just, foundations. And a quarter of those come from China. So again, there are a lot of question marks over this. And I would almost say this not just for international students, but for higher education in general. Yeah, I know universities have often provided online courses to make up for this, but young people are not going to spend a lot of money and a lot of their time to consume online courses. They go to education, to universities, to meet, great people, to have, that very special discussion with the professor, to work with, researchers in a laboratory, to experience a social life on campus. And if those things don't work, I think universities are going to find a very, very hard time. So I think that's something to watch out from this edition. And it's particularly an issue for a country like England, where tuition is very high for national students, but even more so for foreign students. Again, the barriers for young people to pay that are going to be significant. Now, one of the areas where we looked at very carefully in this edition of Education at a Glance is the alternatives to academic learning. The vocational education, career, technical education. And in fact, those kinds of qualifications form the backbone of our economies. When everything was locked down, it was those kinds of professions, the health workers, the social workers, the bus drivers, the mechanics, we relied on them. We suddenly see how important not just academic learning, but vocational education and training are. And actually, you can see that's reflected in employment. In most countries, and I say most countries, actually employment is better for people with vocational degrees at post-secondary level than with academic degrees. But the UK is an exception from this. UK is one of the few countries where actually, vocational education is has good employment outcomes, but not great employment outcomes, and certainly not employment outcomes that are better than academic kind of pathways. And that raises questions about, is vocational education in Britain up to speed with what happens elsewhere in terms of, facilitating transition and making learning interesting, engaging, relevant to the workplace? I think those data put some question marks on this. I want to put some caveat on this. So, it works mainly for young people. If you look to 25 to 34-year-olds, you can see really you're almost as well off in the labor market when it comes to employment as someone with a university degree. But, in the long run, a generic kind of qualification often, is better in securing employment outcomes in the long run. We have to keep that in mind that cover it. And that means also that vocational education today should not be, narrowly oriented to a specific set of occupations. It should be broad. It should be, giving people also future career perspectives. It should be connected to a tertiary education. So those things are really, really important. And the other point I want to make here also is when you look at the earnings advantage in a country like Britain, it's not great. Now, basically, you can see the vocational qualifications get you less in terms of, lifetime earnings than a kind of vocational education. That's true in some other countries as well. Finland would be an example, actually quite similar to the UK, but in the majority of countries, it's the other way around. You have the Czech Republic, actually, it's a good example where you can actually, you get very, very good kind of earnings outcomes with a vocational qualification, less so with general. But I mean, across countries, I would say the employment advantage is greater than the financial advantage. Vocational education needs to get better to generate more value in the labor market to ensure that people benefit from this also financially in many countries, and particularly so in a country like the UK. Now, what makes vocational education and training successful? That's something that we looked also at great detail. And what you can see, for example, here is that if you don't have work experience when you get a vocational qualification, your employment chance is not so great in Britain and in most other countries. But if you have, done an apprenticeship, if you have a mandatory traineeship, or even if you just accumulate work experience totally outside your program, your curriculum, this is adding a lot in terms of employment advantage. So what makes vocational education and training really work is the learning at the workplace, not the learning with real people, the work on real problems, the work that has real consequences. And that's something that, you might, wish is common yet, but it is common in, countries on the right side here. If you look to the Netherlands, to Denmark, Hungary, Germany, and so on, that is a very kind of common experience for young people to go to school and also to work, to have this combined school and work-based learning. But, Britain is just beginning to establish this. And if we're looking at the scaffold, is actually the numbers are only as good because we include a lot of older people who do apprenticeships in Britain. If you actually look at the young people, work-based learning is still very, very rare. And that's something, our data suggests is worth actually having second chances and having a second look at. We also see that connectivity is important. If you become a car mechanic, can you become an engineer in a university later on? Can you connect your vocational degree to future academic qualifications? On the left side, you can see many countries have built that connectivity. In the UK, yeah, it exists for the majority, but it exists for a lot of people only in a very kind of, patchy form. So I think integrating the world of work and the world of learning more consistently throughout the education system is something also to look for. There's certainly a lot to learn from other countries. That being said, all the countries on the left side, some of them look better than they are. They have legally enabled people to go on to university, but in practice, many universities make your life very difficult when you actually start to do that. So I think theory and practice are often not good aligned. I think these numbers in general overestimate the possibility, overestimate the reality in many countries. I mentioned already, in the UK, a lot of people go to vocational training or apprenticeship at older ages. It is something that, the UK might want to make more attractive for the youngest, people in school who are important transitions. Now, bringing the workplace early on into the lives of people to give people more of an experience. The age group 15 to 9 is very important in a number of countries. And there you can see that's not so common in Britain, and most of the apprenticeship are for people, who have difficulties at the workplace and want to catch up, move to another occupation. That's also very important. I think that is a strength of the British system. But again, it shouldn't come at the expense of poor participation at young ages. Now, the last point I want to make on this is, but it's a serious one. Vocational education should cost us more and should, be worth more than academic education. Often you deal with more difficult kind of challenging student groups. it's more complex to provide, expensive equipment for learning than to just put people in the lecture hall and so on. So normally vocational education should be more expensive than academic education. And in fact, in most countries it is, but the UK is a notable exception. You basically can see here that there's a lot more money going into, general programs at the secondary level and a lot less money going into vocational programs. Now, you compare that with Germany or Israel or Austria, where it's the other way around. And I do think that's something to think about. If, we often talk about, recommend vocational education for other people's children. And we don't think about it for our own. And why? Because often the provision is, not that great. The quality of provision is not really at the standard that we find often in, advanced universities. And I do think that is worth to change. It should be not, a last resort. It should be a first choice, like it is, in countries like Switzerland, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway. A lot of young people actually make it their first choice because it's just a great way of learning. You work with, people with up-to-date skills, you have good, career guidance, all of those things. Something to work on. Now, let me turn briefly to tertiary education. That is a sector that has seen a huge expansion. More and more people go to university. You can see if you look at the, first-time graduation rate for students under the age of 30, we are talking about 40%, generally more women than men. That's also a global trend. Quite variable across countries. You can see some countries in the 20s, some countries, almost, 2/3 or more. A lot of variability in this, but all these bars are becoming longer every year. So more and more people getting towards higher qualifications again, because the earnings advantage is great. In many countries, you can see you can double, or some you can double your lifetime earnings with a tertiary degree. And if you actually, think about a bachelor's, master's, or doctor's, it can be even more than that. And this is an area, where the UK used to be more successful. If I had shown you this data, from 10 years ago, the UK came always out quite favorably in terms of, the earnings benefits of universities. But then, when universities expanded so rapidly, more and more people going, somehow quality was a little bit lost on the way. And the expansion of higher education in the UK hasn't, quality hasn't caught up with this. You can see these earnings returns are a good indicator of that. So I think that's something to watch out. Higher education should be what it's meant to be, a really high quality opportunity for advanced skills. Well, there are also some countries on the right side, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, where you can say, well, things look even worse. Yeah, but I wouldn't compare with those countries, because in those countries, the effect is a very different one. It's generally, taxes. Now, these countries charge, academic graduates a lot more in terms of, taxes. So in part because they provide higher education for free. So they make people pay back in a different way. So wage compression is the phenomenon that depresses the earnings. But you can't say this about the UK. The UK labor market is actually quite flexible, very responsive to skills. If you have good skills, actually, the UK is one of the best countries to work in. It's very good in extracting value from the skills of people. But what these data show clearly is that the higher education sector, there are, question marks over relevance and quality. Now, even with the European Union, in the past, the UK was always, one of the star performers in the European Union. Now, actually, most European countries are to the left side of it. Now, even countries, like Germany, that Slovenia, like Hungary, that did not have, a great tradition in earnings outcomes, now do quite well on this. So something to watch out for. And it's not just about money. One of the things that we looked at in this edition also is, what are the social returns to education? For example, what you can see, people with advanced skills are much more likely to feel that they have a say in what governments do. And how important is the voice of people in our societies this day? And it's not just to do with your government and the structures. It is a lot to do with the knowledge and skills that people have. Can you access the world's knowledge? Can you contribute? You can see that relationship is visible in every country. Education is a great way to actually better, more actively participate in political process and social process, to give back something to our society. Now, that was all about, people at the high end of the skill distribution, vocational, academic. Let's talk about people at their early ages. And this is actually a story of success. If I had shown you that picture 20 years ago, the UK, used to come out, almost like the United States. You could talk maybe about, half, 2/3 of the people having 3 to 5 year olds being enrolled. Now, basically, enrollment in the UK is universal. It's some countries catching up to this. Poland, for example, also has seen very dramatic progress. But I think this is a success story for Britain, providing early childhood education and care at a very large scale. Now, that's something that used to be quite different. And, for example, the United States has seen no progress starting from a similar point. So it's not automatic that countries are expanding their kind of system. But, one caveat to this is that even though it's a fair share of GDP going in the early years, simply because the scale of the system, when you look at expenditure per child, that is still a lot less than it is on average across OECD countries. Almost, we talk about 1/3 less of expenditure. And that, in part, the UK has sort of tried to address this with group sizes. Basically, you have few highly qualified teachers in kindergarten to ensure that basically high qualified people are present, but fewer of them. But still, I think the kind of relatively low spending raises some challenges to providing quality education opportunities. You see, the big change is not just expansion and access. The big change that we're also seeing on a global scale is the move from care to education. We understand more and more how crucial the early years are to build the cognitive, the social, the emotional skill set on which then young people can build later success. This is the guarantor of, quality foundations of equity and opportunity. And again, that's something where money eventually will come into as well. Now, that brings me to the last part of the story, and that's just the overall investment in education. The UK ranks very, very high on that, basically number 4 in terms of the overall, share of national income being invested in education. A lot goes into the tertiary level, but still, also at the school level, you can say that there's a lot of resources going into this. It also looks quite strong when you look at this on a per student basis. Now, that's the other way of calculating this, how much is invested per student. And also they're way above the European average, way above the OECD average. So there's a lot of money going into the system. Whether it's always well spent, that's another discussion. We look at the outcomes from our PISA surveys, just sort of so the value for money question will come into this. What we also see is the capital part. There's actually in the schooling sector very little investment in infrastructure compared with the OECD average. Now, that's the different story in tertiary education, a different story in private schools. Private schools actually have a lot of capital investment in Britain. But in public schools, in a time where digitalization matters, where infrastructure becomes a little bit more important, I think those are points to consider. And last point is really teacher salaries. Everybody, every year we look at this, and you can see actually, despite, what you hear in the public debate in Britain, there's always a lot of issue about your teacher pay. Teachers are not that badly paid. When you look at salaries relative to the average worker with a tertiary qualification, actually few countries come out better than Britain. You talk about countries like Finland, like Germany, like Portugal, but pretty much the same. So teachers are relatively, the pay in relative terms is quite okay. For school principals, the pay is actually very good. There's no country where school leaders get as much money as in Britain, or England at least. I should say that here. These data are just about England. They also have a lot of responsibility. School leaders in England, run very autonomous, responsible schools, but, their compensation is a lot better than that of teachers and a lot better than it is in most other countries. Well, it looks slightly different when you look at this in relative terms. In absolute terms, basically there you can see that, well, when you look at spending in absolute terms, particularly minimum qualification, England does not come out so well. But then, you know, after 15 years of experience, those teachers who, you know, remain are doing quite well in this. So I think teaching is reasonably financially attractive. The question, I guess, is more to make teaching intellectually more attractive in Britain. And one of the issues is working time. What you can see here is that teachers in, here are data for Scotland, but England is not very different. The teachers have a lot of hours to teach. They have less time for other things than teaching compared with other countries. Now, in many other countries, teachers are also very much involved in the design of, you know, instructional environments, in collaboration, in expanding their career and so on. And those things are important. You know, you look at a country like Finland. I showed you, you know, the salaries of teachers in Finland are not better than the salaries of teachers in England. But you have about, you know, between 7 and 10 times as many applicants for teacher education in Finland than there are places. Everybody wants to become a teacher. If you don't succeed, you know, to make it into teacher education, you can still, you know, study, you know, law and economics and other things. And that is not because there's so much money in it, but it's just an attractive and an intellectually attractive job. And then that's, I think, something still to work on. Well, I know it's a lot of material that we publish every year, so I try to give you a brief overview over that, and I look forward to our discussion.
Fantastic, Andreas, as usual, an amazing presentation, so much detail, and the slides will be shared. Lots of questions coming in. I'm going to put a couple to you, and then I'm going to move on to the panelists. But those of you who are asking questions, you will get your questions answered later sometime today. So question coming in from Marcus. Are there any trends in blending vocational and academic education?
Yeah, actually, that is something that we can see. Many of the countries that deliver very strong vocational education and training, that is their pattern. Switzerland would be a perfect example where actually many universities actually cater particularly for vocational graduates or people with lots of work experience. So the interconnections are very, very strong. And, you know, I would think in the future, this dichotomy between academic and vocational learning is no longer reflecting the reality of our workplaces. Even, you know, professor of philosophy will need a lot of applied and managerial skills today. And everyone in the workplace, you know, will need a lot of, you know, fairly abstract knowledge. I think the more we can integrate those two worlds, the more successful we will be, and the more open and successful careers can we prepare through education.
Thanks, Andreas. Another question about universities. You know, what you said at the beginning about the online offer being very weak. What more do you think universities can do to strengthen that as an alternative to real life experience, certainly in the short term?
Yeah, you know, in the short term, the online world is going to be very important, but I do think universities really need to reconsider their value proposition to ensure that learners have that social experience, and so ensure that learners have one-on-one connections with their, you know, faculty, that they can actually engage with researchers. I think if universities are just, you know, broadcasting knowledge, they're going to lose their value proposition. We're going to see an unbundling of educational content, delivery, and accreditation. And that's where universities have built a monopoly on. That's where they extract lots of money from students by putting those three things together. But content is now available universally. In fact, you know, you're going to see a lot of private providers, probably, you know, even non-academic ones, providing very, very good online learning opportunities. The delivery is going to change. And the accreditation, you know, micro-credentialing, there's going to be lots of alternatives to recognize people's learning experience. So I do think universities really need to take a hard look at this new reality. This is not just about COVID. I think this is about the post-COVID period. To remain relevant, you have to provide, you know, very kind of advanced experiences to young people to remain attractive.
Okay, and finally, from Nico at the Times, do you think students should defer going to university?
Well, you know, I think you should never defer to learn. I think learning should become a lifelong, life-wide experience. But I do think, you know, again, it's a matter of, is it the right thing to go after school to university, or is it a great thing to get actually some real experience somewhere in the world? And you probably study with, you know, a new eyes on on the way in which you learn. I think the past was about, you stack up as many qualifications as you can in the early years of your life. And then, you're fed up with this, you never go back to school. But we can no longer learn once for a lifetime. I think the key today is, can we motivate people? Can we give people the right tools, the right learning strategies to continue learning throughout their lives? And in that sense, my advice to my children has been, not always successfully, go out, try out something, and, create your own job. And then later on, you can always go back and study.
Fantastic. I'm going to bring you over to our panelists now, who've been quietly waiting. Thank you. I'm going to start off with Jennifer Copeland. Jennifer, maybe you could say in sort of 30 seconds, introduce yourself, and then say a little bit about what role you see vocational education training going forward as we sort of bounce back from COVID. I'll also ask the other panelists the same question. Jennifer.
Hi everyone, it's 12:30 here, so good afternoon from South London. I'm Jennifer Copeland. I'm the Chief Executive of the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education in England. I mean, in terms of the role that I see apprenticeships and technical education playing in the sort of post-COVID pandemic, and there's a big question mark, isn't there, about whether we are quite post-COVID. I think it's going to play a really important role in delivering the skills that all our economies need to recover. I mean, picking up on some of the points that Andreas mentioned in his slides, I think we have been making pretty good strides in improving the quality of the apprenticeship offer. We've been putting employers in the driving seat of setting those standards, and that's having a real impact, both in terms of the amount of funding that's drawing into the system, but also in terms of building an apprenticeship program where people can progress and there is greater connectivity into the higher levels of technical education and training. So I think there is a big part for it to play. I think there are challenges. Clearly, the economy is in a difficult situation. Those opportunities that young people might have expected at this time last year may not be there to the same degree. So I think there is also a role for classroom-based vocational education to kind of take up some of that slack that will have been created by the pandemic.
Okay, thanks for that. And Keith, from the Department for Education, I know you're leading on a lot of this work at the moment. Keith, do you want to just say 30 seconds about you and what you're doing in response to the question?
Yeah, thank you. And hi, everyone. So my name is Keith Smith. I'm Director of Post-16 Strategy in the Department for Education. And I think it's been, I think we really welcome the findings of this once again. We clearly a stark reminder that we've got to understand the real value of further and technical education and training, not least because of the sort of the challenges of the coronavirus, but also because of the longer term benefits in relation to both wealth, prosperity, and obviously social mobility. And I think what's really interesting about the data is that it's about sort of understanding not just what it does in relation to the impact in the short term around the coronavirus, but what we actually need to be thinking about in the medium to longer term, particularly when we're thinking about the skills that people need to have to really make our economy thrive and obviously recover. And obviously our recovery and growth thinking and strategies and the offer and the opportunities we give people now are perhaps more important and more stark than ever. We've already taken some pretty unprecedented steps across the UK in terms of how we sort of plan and have tried to protect jobs and particularly support people in work during the current pandemic. We're doing more, and we need to do a lot more in relation to what we're doing to transform the sort of the world of vocational education and training in particular. And this really is an opportunity, we think, across England to build upon not just the high quality work around apprenticeships and the work that we've been doing around introducing T-levels and building a more substantial network of institutes of technology. But we really want to think about how we embrace all of that good principle focus on vocational education training across the whole of the further education and technical education system.
Okay, thanks for that.
So is that helpful?
Yeah, that's fantastic. We'll bring you back in a minute. Just moving to Prisha, one of our who is actually doing an apprentice at Google. Prisha, do you want to introduce yourself, say where you are, and really why you're doing what you're doing?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Prisha and I'm a digital marketing apprentice at Google, and I started last year in October. I chose an apprenticeship because while studying for A-levels and GCSEs, as part of my hobby, I was filming videos on YouTube to raise awareness of my chronic condition and visible difference, to help young kids who may have been bullied and to help them build confidence. And alongside that, I was kind of sharing my journey, and alongside that journey I realized that I really enjoyed marketing. And through that, I also had work experience at my hospital, Great Ormond Street, and because of that I fell into love with marketing. So I thought, why not combine my passion of studying but also working and kind of get the on-the-job experience. And I'm 10 months in and I honestly feel like it's the best decision I've made.
So that's fantastic. Just relating there to what Andreas was saying earlier about, people's experience of the world of work. We've done a lot of research just about how important that is about getting into jobs and at a young age, those sort of influences. Yusra, you're in Morocco, are you? Do you want to just say again who you are and what route you've taken? You've taken a fascinating route. Thanks, Prisha.
Good morning from Morocco. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So as a child, I always be passionate of technology. I've always imagined myself creating things, solving problems, and making life easier for everyone. So I decided that it's electronic what I wanted to do, even if it's a big deal for me, but I choose to go for it. So I choose vocational education training as my path because for me it's such an interesting and effective training to develop and refine my skills and abilities. Also offer the most beneficial learning by doing transition program, like to provide relevant skills and real experience in terms of learning in the workplace to prepare for the job market and to improve one's skills. And also thanks to vocational education training, I had the privilege to participate and be part of a unique and powerful experience in the WorldSkills International competition.
An amazing competition. So it's great, and to see so many people around the world taking part in WorldSkills. We've also taken views of young people. We've done a poll recently. I think Henry and OECD, I hope you can hear me from here in Cambridge. And we're now just going to ask everybody the 3 questions we've been asking the last couple of days, really about what's people's reaction. Henry, I hope the technology works. Here it does. There you go. So if you're online now, can you vote and see where we get to? 16, 17. Right, we've got 3 quick questions we're going to do. You've got 10 seconds. 5 seconds. Final chance. Okay, let's move on. Next one is another question, Henry. Or should we share the? Yeah. Again, has it changed? Andreas was saying a little bit about that. Five seconds. All right. All right, next one, the final question, Henry. Final question, which is coming up now. It says, which it is. Yeah. Looking away there. All right, couple of seconds, and then we're probably done. Okay, Henry, that's fine. Can you close the poll now? Thanks. Now, do you want to share? Can you share those results with us? I think you'll be able to share all 3 results. This is going to work. Shout loudly to see if you can hear me in Paris. Yeah, can you just share the results? I think everyone can see that. So first one, 59%, I think it'll be more attractive. Second question. Second question, Henry. Okay. So yeah, that's quite interesting. 77% think the skills contributing. And Henry, if you can just also show the, we've been doing a big poll with a whole series of people on the question. I think you've got a couple of slides to show what people have been saying internationally on these two questions. And I'm going to go to the panelists and others to get their reaction. Okay, there we go. Just need to get rid of the polling thing. Hope everyone can see that. So this was across a whole series of audiences that, you know, the majority we think here are adults, so 78% thinking that children's careers, aspirations have changed as a result of COVID. Second question, where we, Henry, if you can move on to the second question. Sorry, back again, sorry, Instagram. Now, we suspect on the Instagram, sorry, bouncing back, on the Instagram results, keep on that one, the Instagram results, we suspect that most of these are young people. We're not entirely sure, but we think that is the case. Now, this is only an informal poll, but what it seems to be saying is that a lot more adults, 78, 79, similar to our results, think that kids' careers, aspirations are going to change as a result of COVID. Young people, over half are saying that their career aspirations are likely to change, but less so than adults. I just need to stress this is an informal poll, you know, it's not an official OECD poll, but it just gives us a bit of thought as to how sort of people are moving. Right, so I'm going to go back to the panelists, and I might start off with well, let's see if any of you, Keith, do any of these results surprise you?
I think you know, I think as we've been sort of hearing, and it's great that, you know, the other panelists are finding a great path for themselves, you know, doing through vocational education training. So I just want to pay tribute to them and your stories. Thank you for sharing those. I think it's not a surprise. I think the coronavirus is going to impact, and we've seen impact in many aspects of our lives. It'd be very surprising if people's thinking about their jobs and their careers in the futures isn't also kind of reflecting in some of those changes. But I would probably reflect that people's changing views of their career journeys may not be a bad thing. And actually, it may be that young people are thinking about exploring a future in a different way. Clearly, what we've got to do, and the challenge for us, is about making sure we've got a system which is really responding to the needs of the economy, the businesses, the labour market, and really centre it in the world of work, as Andreas was saying previously. So I think we had an opportunity, actually, that we can try and tap in to the thinking that, you know, young people are particularly doing about their future. We can open up hopefully new pathways for them to do that, and really start to build a fantastic and credible alternative to people following just a traditional academic route.
Yeah, thanks for that. And maybe I'll come on to the other panelists if anyone's got want to comment on that. I mean, I think Andreas may be able to comment further. You know, the wonderful lady Marianne Wright Edelman said, you know, you can't be what you can't see. And I think that for a lot of young people, you know, if they can't see their roles, how can they envision doing that? And one thing about COVID is it's made a lot of jobs much more visible, and that's, we think, maybe what's happening here. For the panelists, is anything about those results you want to comment on? I'll go to the other three panelists, including Henrik, who is HR Director at Optima in Germany, who's been doing VET since 1937. Not Henrik, I should stress, but I think you can also join us, but I don't think your camera is working, but we don't want to exclude you. So any of the other panelists who want to jump in there about the survey? Jennifer, I can see you putting your hand up.
I just to build on Keith's point, I think there is, I think it's completely to be expected, isn't it, that young people will be thinking again about potential choices that they might have made had they been making their choices last year. So, as you know, obviously retail, hospitality, travel and tourism, those kinds of sectors have been pretty hard hit. But other areas, I think, as you say, have been much more exposed to a sort of broader range of the public in terms of the importance of particular sectors to the good of society, you know, so things around the health and social care and adult social care, the importance of our key workers, the importance of even industries, our utilities industries that have had to keep going throughout the pandemic to keep us supplied with water and gas and electricity and all those sorts of things. I think people have realised that actually the value of those roles, and it may be that some of the traditional maybe unthinking tracks into academia might seem less attractive to people who might be more socially motivated following the pandemic, and we may well see a kind of increase in young people moving into those sorts of roles.
Okay, Hendrik, do you want to come in here? I know we can't see you, but we can hear you.
Yeah, I was actually also very struck by Prisha's comment. I think she explained to us how her aspirations got actually shaped through her experience. And I do think that is really something that we should take to heart. And Nick, you said it, you can't be what you can't see. And, typically we get students into school and sometimes university, and then we ask them, oh, well, now figure out what you want to do in your life. Actually, we should bring that experience into the lives of people much, much earlier. And Keith made the point, yeah, we should make, vocational education interesting and relevant and attractive for employers. I agree with this. But first and foremost, we should try to make it attractive to young people. We should understand, what their aspirations are and connect it to their own ideas and learning experience. And I think that's really, what, I take away from this poll. People know, their life is going to change. Their, the careers that are available to them are going to change. But we need to ensure that it's going to be a change for the better. And I think this responsiveness to the interests and needs of people, bringing work experience, Nick, you do that really well, into primary schools. Now, the most important career decisions you don't make when you graduate from school. You make them when you are in the first years of schooling. That's when you decide, whether you're going to take school serious, where you put your emphasis, what subjects you're going to study hard. And I think all of this is shaped by experience. So I think we can do a lot on this.
Yeah, no, it's a very important point. I mean, one of some of the OECD data, I think Dream Jobs was showing just how narrow children's aspirations are. They looked to group around sort of 10 jobs that either they know people doing or are visible jobs. And that is across the world, isn't it, Andreas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, but we can change it, I think, and that I think is something which this crisis has really, pointed us to.
Right, Sebastian, can we, thank you, Andreas. Sebastian, can we, do you want to just come in here a little bit from, you've kindly joining us from Germany at Optima? I don't know.
Yes, of course. Yes, hello, everybody. My name is Sebastian Henke. I'm the Human Resources Director of a company. We are producing filling and packaging machines, and we are offering vocational training quite a long time, 83 years, and we offer a lot of jobs for apprentices. We have, for example, machine mechanics, mechatronics, warehouse logistic experts, technical product designers, computer science experts, and office clerks, and we do a lot of activities to get the attention of the young people, starting with activities in the age of 12 of the pupils to try to get them into the company and offer them interesting working groups with computers, with Lego Technic, programming, and so on. Yeah. And yeah, we offer them quite additional training besides the formal training in the vocational school, in the company with special courses, so that they are really well trained for the job after the vocational training, after 3.5 years. Yeah, what questions do you have to me? Perhaps I can answer some questions.
Maybe just why as a company, why VET is so important. What do you think the major benefits to you as an employer are? And obviously you've been doing it for 83 years. Why is it so important? What would you say the main benefit is to you as a company for investing in VET?
Yeah. The benefit is the combination of a practical and theoretical training with a focus on practical skills during the training. And all the apprentices get a very good knowledge of our machines, so that is really an advantage. And all of our business units are located on the countryside. And we have a very low unemployment rate of around about 3% during the last years. And we recruited 80 up to 100 positions each year over the last 5 years. And so the apprentices are really a good contribution to fill our needs with young people. So our average age is under 40 years. That's, I think, really good.
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. That was really helpful. Moving on slightly, in terms of advice, one question I'd like to ask all the panelists and also Andreas in due course is, you know, if you were to give a piece of advice to a sort of 15-year-old, well, some of you are nearly 15, but if you were to give your piece of advice to a 15-year-old about their career journey, what would it be? I'm going to start with, who I'll start with? Jennifer, I'm going to start with. So I'd put you on the spot. If you have to give an advice to a 15-year-old, what would it be on careers at the moment, today?
I'm actually living this, Nick, because I've got a 20-year-old, a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old at home. So I'm kind of living this experience as we speak. I mean, I think the advice I'm giving to my children, in the same way as Andreas was talking about his earlier on, is you know, you need to find something that you feel passionate about and that you love, and therefore you'll be successful at it. You know, it is a bit challenging at the moment, and I think things that people might have thought in the short term that they would be able to do, some of those opportunities have melted away in the current climate, but there are other things that you can do to kind of keep yourself on the same track heading towards your longer term goals. So I think your survey earlier on about will career aspirations change? I think people's aspirations are, you know, will still be their aspirations. It just might take them slightly longer to get to where they want to be.
Thank you. And you, sir, over in Morocco? There you go.
I will say, just trust yourself. You will certainly face a lot of challenges in your life, and just have the courage to pursue your passion and keep working hard, because all your work hard will pay off at the end.
And what inspired you to do your studying in electronics and vocational education? Where did you get your inspiration from?
Well, it was as a child, I was passionate of electronics, while watching TV, new inventions. I just found it like a source of magic. And yeah. I've always imagined myself creating things, solving problems, and making life easier for everyone. So that's why I decided to do electronics.
Okay. Sebastian?
Yes, my advice would be reflect and focus your talents and be persistent in going your own way.
Good. Keith?
So mine would just be, I very much agree with all of the sentiments. I think my additional sentiment would be, you know, explore, experiment, try and find what your passion and what your love is, and don't try to put too much pressure on yourself. You know, it's a fantastic journey, and you know, try and sort of give as many experiences as you possibly can, and find the path that works for you.
Fantastic. And Prisha, finally from you.
Yeah, I would say definitely keeping options open. As growing up, I thought that university was the only route, especially because I didn't really know any other information apart from universities. And I think something that I would tell myself is kind of speaking to more young people and kind of just finding out about different jobs and different careers out there, because I didn't know about this Google apprenticeship until I wanted to kind of realize that I actually thought apprenticeships were for me. And so I think looking early on and having conversations early on with your teachers, with your parents, can really help you. And I think also realizing how success is such a personal thing, because growing up I thought university was the only successful route. And I really wish early on I realised that success is so personal and so down to you. And if an apprenticeship or an alternative route is successful, why not just try that and see where it takes you?
That's what a fantastic story. And finally, Andreas, a bit of advice to a 15-year-old?
Yeah, well, you know, I think you can only be successful in life if you do what you love and if you love what you do. But it's actually not that easy to become aware of what you love to do. And I think to become aware of your passion, I think that's actually, you know, easier said than done. And I do think it has to do with, you know, experimenting, as Keith said it, you know, go out, you know, try to look at different jobs, do job shadowing, understand the world. I think that's very, very important to understand, you know, what is it really I want to do. I think it's also very important to become aware of what can I become really, really good at. You know, it's passion is important, but it's also sort of there. Where are my talents? How do they match? And last but not least, you know, I think we should all ask us, where can I make a difference in this world?
That's a fantastic point on that particular discussion. We have a few more questions just coming in from journalists from your presentation, Andreas, if I may ask you, particularly what effect do you think school closures in the UK will it have long-term damage on the UK economy? So will school closures in the UK have a long-term damage on its economy?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's from Camilla at the Telegraph.
Yeah, you know, I think there's no question about it, unfortunately. You know, I think the level of school closures that we have seen in the UK, you know, are going to put a dent into people's individual earnings, but they're also going to put a big dent into the long-term economic well-being. You know, if you add up all of the kind of lost earnings and lost income for a country, you will end up with hundreds of you know, billions of pounds in this. We have actually just next week we're going to come up with a report on this. I think the implications will be serious, but what worries me more is that they are not going to be evenly spread out. You know, for young people who knew how to learn, who had, you know, great teachers supporting them, access to good technology. Maybe this lockdown has been liberating and exciting, you know, they learn in different ways. But for the many young people who used to be spoon-fed by their teachers, who learned in little bits and chunks, who may have never really been motivated by school, they were left very, very badly behind. And I do think, you know, teachers are going to find a much more diverse world now that schools are reopening. The inequalities, this crisis is dramatically amplified. There are many inadequacies and also inequities in our schooling. And yeah, we are going to see that in the long run.
That's very helpful. Lots of other questions. Any sort of final questions for Andreas or the panel? We've got sort of a couple of minutes to go. Really appreciate all the panelists joining us today, all the technology working. I know we'll be following up with all the slides coming through. Trying to read all your questions on the screen. I think we're probably at a close, but I think we can follow up privately on email or messages. So very big thanks from me for all of you from joining. It's lovely to see all the sort of chat coming in from everywhere from Nigeria to Mexico and all the ideas. Andreas, another brilliant presentation there, but also looking at what we can do, particularly to support young people. You know, and there are some rays of hope in what we're doing. There are some things we can do. You know, it's very encouraging that kids are seeing now vocational education in a different light, and we need to build on that and support young people. And we hear experiences of Prisha and Yusra, you know, at that age doing some really exciting things. So I think a bit of maybe a golden dawn for vocational education here in the UK. So thanks to everybody. I think we will close. Thanks. If you have any questions, we'll follow up by email. Thank you very much.